into verbal communication. There's nonverbal communication and there's verbal communication. The only difference between the two is words. That's it. Words make verbals verbals, and no words make nonverbals nonverbals. But today we're going to focus on verbals, okay? First thing you need to know is that language is a body of symbols, okay? And then basically a rule book or a system on how to use those symbols, okay? If you look at the United States, actually you could look at several portions of the United States, and then if you look at Australia and you look at Britain, all those places speak English, but they don't have the same language because they kind of have a different system on how to use the same symbols, right? So language is this body of symbols and a system on how to use those symbols. A speech community is a community that speaks the same language, okay? So pretty much everyone in Alabama speaks the same language. But if you go to New York, they kind of have a different way of doing things. Their language is very similar to ours, but their language is not as different as, say, England or Australia. So keep that in mind. We talked about words in a previous video, and words are just a type of symbol. That's all that words are. So in verbal communication, words are the symbol of choice, okay? Now, we talked again in a previous video about a marker and how the word marker is a symbol, okay? We also talked about how as markers began to progress, you had coloring markers and you had dry erase markers and you had paint markers. As markers progressed and as we found new ways to use markers, we also had to create new words or new symbols to be able to name those things. So one very important thing that language does for us is by naming things, such as a marker, we can perceive some aspects of the world and ignore others. So in a box full of markers, all different kinds of markers, if you said, Miss Oliver, I need a dry erase marker, I know exactly which kind of marker to get. If you said, Miss Oliver, I need a red dry erase marker, I know exactly which one to pick up. If you, let's say that all these markers were black. Let's just imagine for a second that all these markers were black. And you said, I need a cap for one of the markers. And I just looked at your hand, I would know I'm looking for a black cap, right? So by naming things, we have a way of thinking about things, we have a way of perceiving things, and we have a way of ignoring things. And it helps us to start to understand how people think and what people are thinking. Now, it is easier to name concrete things than it is to name abstract things. I just finished talking to you about markers. What if we were talking about love? What if a friend came up to you and said, I love you, but they didn't mean I want to marry you, or they didn't mean that, or vice versa, they did want to marry you, but you perceived it as, I love you as a friend, you know. So those kinds of things are more difficult to name, but there are words to help us to kind of perceive some things and ignore other things. But when it gets to abstract language, you have to get more and more and more specific. That's why there are so many names for the word love. If you go and look up all the words for love and you study them, you see that there are so many words to talk about love, and people still feel like they don't have enough. Why? Because if you remember in the last video, meanings exist either here or here. And if we have not quite found the right word to explain what's going on in here and what's going on in here, it can be quite frustrating because we like to be understood. We are human and we like to be understood by other humans. So language has a relationship with meaning, okay? And we're going to kind of walk through the different characteristics that language has with meaning. So first and foremost, the meaning of words lies within people, not within the words themselves, okay? If you have ever said something to someone that you meant one way and they took it another way, then you understand that the meaning lies within the people themselves, not within the actual words. So even derogatory words, even words of like the Bible and things like that, they tend to lie within people themselves. So it's important first to know the people that are sending the message, and second, to know the people that are receiving the message, the audience, okay? All words have multiple meanings. So a simple example would be the word cool. I could say it's cool in here. I could say that was really cool. Those two words are the same word, but they have a different meaning. That's a simple explanation. A more complicated explanation is simply in your everyday life, you have experiences with your friends, and those experiences bring about different meanings for different words. So that's how, pop culture comes up with all these different words that used to mean one thing and now mean something else. When you say something is so fresh, that's not the same thing anymore as saying something smells good or something is clean. It's now something is fresh, like something is exciting and innovative and something like that, okay? So all words have multiple meanings. Secondly, all words have two levels of meaning. Okay, you have the dictionary level, and then you have the level that people assign to it, okay? This also goes for nonverbals, which we will talk about later, but when you think about the denotation of a word, just think about the idea that you have this dictionary with a bunch of words in it, and they have no context, okay? They're just a bunch of words in a dictionary. Connotation is how you pluck those words out of the dictionary and use them, and then how you meant them and how they were received. Now, something that you need to understand as a public speaker, there are two levels of meaning. The most important interpretation is going to be the interpretation of your audience. What you meant as a speaker is moot once it comes out of your mouth, okay? And remember, in order to be a competent speaker, you have to be effective, which means you have to reach a goal, and you have to be appropriate, which means you have to meet expectations of your audience. So when you think about misunderstandings and things that happen, you kind of have to take responsibility for those misunderstandings, because however your audience perceives it is the right way, okay? It's kind of like the customer is always right. Once they've received it, if they didn't receive it the way that you meant, then you need to try another way, because the meaning is in here and you need to get it out. They haven't gotten it yet, okay? Meanings are not transferable. We cannot just beam them to each other. So you've got to use your words. So remember this idea. There are a few other characteristics that I want to talk about next. Okay, we talked first about how the meaning of words is not in the words themselves, but in people. And secondly, about how words have a denotative meaning and a connotative meaning. Okay, thirdly, Words have syntactic context. So where a word lies in a sentence can give it a different inflection, okay? And you can definitely take the example that I gave previously on the word cool to understand this context. So it's really cool in here, that was cool, you know, how you use that word in different sentences changes the meaning of the word, okay? Now, the fourth thing is that language changes over time, and there are so many reasons and rhymes as to why language changes over time. This is just a few, okay? First, language, we have to create new words, especially with technology. Since phones have come out, there have been so many new words that it is unbelievable. I mean, Facebooking is a verb, right? So things like that, things like technology make us have to create new words so that we can perceive some things and ignore other things. If you think about when phones first came out, I don't really remember what the very first phone was. I want to say it was a Nokia. If you're old enough to remember, then you'll remember a little Nokia phone that was blue that you could change the casings on forever. You could change the buttons on. You could do all kinds of things to that phone. It was called a Nokia, but I want to say we just called them cell phones. Now we have Androids, we have all different kinds of Androids, we have, what do you call those phones? Amazon phones, we have iPhones. Those are really the only ones I pay attention to, but I'm sure you know more of them. So we have to have all those names so that we can ignore some and perceive others whenever we're talking about a cell phone. There are infinite examples of that, but we have to continue creating words so that our culture can continue to progress.